gentlemen, children of all ages, welcome to this another Buds on Film podcast. I'm Scott Morris and I'm joined today by Drew Davendale.
Hello.
And today we are browsing through the case files of MK Ultra, or at the very least we're taking a look at two very contrasting films based loosely around the theories of brainwashing. We're going to be talking about Joe Wright's 2011 outing, Hanna, and John Frankenheimer's 1962 classic, The Manchurian Candidate. We will just dive straight into taking a look at Hanna. If a director's career path were to be formulated as some kind of geometric series, Joe Wright's would be unsolvable. There's a leap from straight period piece Pride and Prejudice to a stoic period drama Atonement to the stoic drama The Soloist. That has some sort of obvious arc to it, but the neatness of this graph is rather ruined by 2011's Hanna, which is a balls-out mental Born Identity meets crank fever dream. But perhaps I am getting ahead of myself. We're introduced to Eric Heller, played by Eric Bana, out in the isolated snowy wilderness, raising his daughter Hanna, Saoirse Ronan, in the usual homeschool topics of hunting, hand-to-hand combat, marksmanship, and, all the usual activities for a growing teenager.
Oh yeah, it's the regular primary school curriculum, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's what we all go through, certainly up in Scotland. You need to be prepared for the winters, when winter is coming. As a sidebar, I have a policy of always pronouncing Ralph Fiennes as Ralph Fiennes because it's clearly spelt Ralph, not Rafe. Now, if I am going to do that, surely I should be calling Saoirse Ronan Saoirse Ronan, because there is no logical way to get from that combination of letters to Saoirse.
But it's a different language, Scott. An Irish name.
I don't think that's a good excuse. Anyway, Saoirse Ronan. It's clear from the off that something is unusual about the situation, and I mean the film, not Saoirse's spelling of her name. After all, there's normally very little need for teenagers to memorise so detailed a cover identity, unless perhaps they're attempting to bamboozle an off-licence assistant. It transpires that the Hellers escaped to the wilds after CIA bigwig Marissa Wiegler, played by Cate Blanchett, ordered their deaths, successfully in the case of Hanna's mother, with Hanna now having grown and proving to be sufficiently levelled in the badass skill categories. Eric gives a rather unusual gift to Hanna, a transponder that will reveal their location to those who've been looking for them, which will kick off their frankly poorly detailed plan to get a measure of revenge for Hanna's mother and see Marissa pay. Eric heads off on the run, and Hanna waits to meet the capture squad. Now, from here on in, it's pretty hard to say if it actually goes according to plan. I rather assume not, as after Hanna's taken to a CIA black site for interrogation, which proves fatal to most of the base's staff, and also the poor chick pretending to be Marissa, Hanna makes good her escape, only to have Marissa sick the uniquely tailored assassin Isaacs, played by Tom Hollander, and his skin-headed henchman on Hanna's trail. Now, this leads to a fairly unique trail of violence across Europe, with Isaacs being rather unpleasant to the people who show kindness to Hanna on her trek to Germany for a pre-arranged meeting point with Eric, where all of these moving parts meet in a rather final way for most of them. Now, this potted recap rather minimises the dizzying array of locations and set pieces that it takes to get there, all thrown at you at a frenetic pace, almost too frenetic for its own good. In fact, I dimly remember watching this on release and being rather overwhelmed by it all, and I think our general reaction was somewhere in the region of meh.
That's largely how I remember it, yes, it was largely meh.
Yeah, I'm actually happy to say that I enjoyed this a great deal more on second viewing, perhaps because I was pre-warned as to how quirky and how, in many places, outright silly the film is.
Yeah, I found something similar. So I suppose if we carry on with the end of that thought, that I do remember finding it, yes, meh, and I think in a few points a little tiring. The first time, but the second viewing of a few days ago, I found it much, much more engaging.
Yeah, I think forewarned is definitely forearmed here. I think that there's still some moments where the dramatic elements are a little tough to reconcile with the high-concept nature of both the action sequences and the revelations about Hanna's origins, which I'm sure surprises no one to find out there's something unusual about. But that's not so much the actor's fault. Bana and Ronan have as believable a relationship and reactions as you could expect them to have, considering. But
yes, there's a lot of caveats there with that, really. Well, the former CIA agent adopted father who raised the girl in the wilderness of Finnish forest doesn't have a normal relationship with the girl? You don't say.
It does rather get undercut by the overarching daftness of it all. And on occasions, I'm left wishing they'd played it rather less straight than they do. But as alluded to earlier, we already have that film, and it's Crank and Crank 2 High Voltage. And visually, at least, it's not a million miles away from those two masterpieces of stupidity, which I intend as a high compliment. And
yes, same sort of soundtrack as well.
Yeah,
That, so it helps sort of cement that connection there.
Mm-hmm. The next thing I say, special mention must be made of the Chemical Brothers' pounding soundtrack, which is really well integrated into the movie, very cleverly in many places, and it provides a real driving heartbeat for many essential sequences, and it's just edited together really, really tightly. And yeah, I think on the second time, the only thing that annoyed me was Blanchett's rather broad southern accent, which borders on parody, but I suppose is at least recognisable for once.
Yes, that's exactly. It's unlike so many of her accents, it's from this planet.
Yeah.
I'm not sure you could localise it a great deal more than that, but it's okay. It's an Earth accent, I think. It's not from Pluto or whatever she does in most other films.
It's not her Russian accent.
But hold on, it was Ukrainian. Ukrainian by way of Mars.
Anyway, that's a small point and insignificant in the grand scheme of things, and I'm actually really glad I revisited this. I'm much happier recommending this time round than it was on first view. Some really, really nice action sequences sort of hold this film together, quite inventively done. Lots of really quite impressively varied and distinct, interesting visuals to go along with it, and a thumping soundtrack, and better acting than the source material possibly deserves. But yeah, it all hangs together, I think, actually quite well. But you just have to take cognizance that it's a bit silly going into it and have that squirreled away at the back of your mind.
Yeah, for me again, yes, I don't think I liked it quite as much the second viewing as you, but certainly a great deal more than the first time. And it is quite interesting. It's got a bit more humour than I remember. I remember it being sort of a bit self-serious when I watched it the first time, and I didn't feel that much this way. Although some of the humour does come at the expense of Hanna, who seems to have put all of her special attributes into strength and endurance and none into perception and intelligence. But yeah, I don't have too much to add to what you've said. It's unusual to see a film like that both with a female lead, because yes, the obvious thing that it's like is something like The Bourne Identity, where it's a generally very powerful man in that role, and so this is in fact a teenage girl, so that it's quite refreshingly different from that point of view. Just how many hardcore action films do you see with a teenage girl in it? Because I can't really think of many.
No, I mean the closest you're getting is probably the Hunger Games stuff, which isn't really action in that. Certainly nothing.
Not in that way, no.
Yeah.
And it's more about Jennifer Lawrence's character's skill rather than strength, and it's not that sort of hand-to-hand combat that's in this.
Yeah.
That's nice. It's just, when you see a lot of films in the same genre, just anything that mixes up a little is always welcome.
Yes.
The soundtrack's great. Interesting settings. It's actually, I remember, I didn't check this, but I think this is a relatively low-rated film, like a 12 or something. Despite the fact people are, or was it maybe a 15, I don't know. The fact that people are shot to death with arrows and then tied upside down, hanging from the inside of the Jacob Grimm house in Berlin. Then sort of abandoned theme parks and the fiberglass dinosaurs and stuff. And then you've got the forest and then sunny parts of North Africa, southern France. Things. Yeah, it's a very, very varied setting. It's visually interesting. As is Tom Hollander.
Yes, and I like seeing Tom Hollander in most things, but he's particularly unique in this instance.
Yes, I actually think I do remember finding him odder the first time round. This time he didn't stand out as much to me. Maybe I was expecting that and was concentrating more on the rest, but the shock of bleached blonde hair and the shell suits and things, that's a very strange character.
Yes.
Why that character's like that, I have no idea, but it's distinctive, which is enough. Genuinely, it's not a brilliant film, but it's pretty entertaining. The only thing I really don't like about this film is Cate Blanchett, because I have come to the realisation, come and go, there's some things, but I think I've come to the realisation that I really, really don't like Cate Blanchett.
Yeah.
I think accent is maybe something to do with it, because she can't do them.
Yeah.
And it's not an accent I particularly care for anyway, that one. again, I mean, and I appreciate that people might not like our accents. That's fine. I just don't like American. But maybe when it's a fake Southern American accent, it's what makes it really bad.
Yeah, and I just checked. This was a 12A past uncut in the UK. So I guess when that was handed in, it was handed in with a nice big fat stack of cash.
Yes, the other thing, it's quite brutal in parts. And even though it happens off screen, it's not in any way subtle about the fact that Tom Hollander has tortured and killed that guy, the clown guy, with arrows, and then you see his body hanging upside down with arrows protruding from it.
Yeah.
In a film that conceivably a 3-year-old could be taken to see, depending on your parent.
Yeah. Yeah, no one really gets out of this well. I mean, pretty much everyone on screen is going to die apart from one character, I believe, including, sadly, the family that Hannah travels with, that's headed up by Jason Fleming and Olivia Williams, who I think I found quite annoying on first time through, but when you actually listen more closely to their dialogue and the little barbs and Jason Fleming's little asides, they're actually really quite funny and really quite relatable all the way through it.
I don't think they get it that well. And then, so I'm thinking too, I'm now sort of stuck on this idea of this being rated 12A because there's a bit where somebody's grandmother gets shot in the head at point blank range in cold-blooded murder in a 12A.
No, just like the Disney films do. Yeah, I mean, we've had this discussion before about exactly what on earth is going on with film ratings these days, but this is actually one of the most egregious examples, isn't it?
I know, I remember we talked, I think it may have been on the one-liner rather than Fuds in Film, we're talking about Total Recall, the remake of Total Recall, and how violent that was. But I think because a lot of the violence in this is more up close and personal, particularly like that grandmother thing, like, this is possibly worse. And again,
and it's so cold.
There was nothing legally stopping a 3-year-old being taken to this film. You know?
I guess we can just hope that some parents have self-restraint and control, and
which they don't. So all those kids are screwed. But okay.
Well, they're still probably better off watching this than, say, Transformers. So
Now, this film, I guess, is brainwashing of a sort. It's someone being indoctrinated, perhaps, certainly brought up in a vacuum away from any other influences, and more or less being honed to do one particular task. And then what happens when all that training in a vacuum meets reality and other people? What then if you take someone who's already fully formed and try to brainwash them? So, Scott, I assumed you would finish talking about Hanna.
Yes, I have. So I guess that takes us to the Manchurian Candidate.
So yes, what would you do with brainwashing somebody fully formed? How would that go? Well, maybe you just have to use magic, because I think maybe the actual brainwashing component of Hanna is a bit more believable, and that it's just a bit of a conditioning thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's go back in time. Korea. I hope you're doing the hands just like in Wayne's World.
Of course I'm doing the hands.
Good man. Korea, 1952. A platoon of US soldiers in a brothel is given the hurry up by their universally beloved Sergeant Raymond Shaw, played by Lawrence Harvey. Grumbling at their fun being spoiled, it seems once again, by this joyless and charmless martinet, the platoon set out on patrol. A few days later, and the platoon, who had been reported missing, reappear, bearing stories of the heroism and daring-do of Shaw, citations for his bravery from the platoon commander Captain Bennett Marco, and a description from every surviving member of Raymond Shaw as the kindest, bravest, warmest, most wonderful human being I've ever known in my life. Such irreconcilable statements can be explained, though, by the fact that the platoon were, in fact, kidnapped by the Chinese while on their patrol and flown to Manchuria, where they were brainwashed and programmed by Chinese and Soviet experts. We are treated to surreal scenes of the soldiers believing that they are attending a presentation of a women's institute-like society, though rather than prim and proper ladies, the attendees are all bigwigs from China and the USSR. As the soldiers, brainwashed to see Shaw as their saviour so that he can return the hero and be awarded the Congressional Medal of Honour, calmly sit and listen, Shaw is instructed to murder 2 of his squad mates, which he does, without question, calmly and blithely. Controlled by a deck of cards, and in particular the Queen of Diamonds, the unaware and unassuming assassin Raymond returns to the US, where, after a period of 2 years, he is tested to ensure that his mechanisms are still intact, before being turned over to his US handler who, it turns out, just happens to be his overbearing, domineering and sinister mother. The plan is that Raymond will be used to assassinate the presidential nominee at a party convention, leading to the vice presidential nominee, and Raymond's stepfather, rallying a nation of viewers to hysteria to sweep us up into the White House with powers that will make martial law seem like anarchy. That is, unless Frank Sinatra's Captain Marco can get to the bottom of the terrible dreams that haunt him every night and stop Shaw bringing about the election of Senator Iceland, the Manchurian Candidate. It is amusing that Manchurian Candidate became a byword for brainwashed sleeper, despite the fact that the sleeper facilitates the candidate but is not the candidate himself. But I digress, but such things annoy me. It's a thoroughly entertaining conspiracy thriller, as well as a biting satire, and often damn funny with it, on both the McCarthy-esque right wing and the holier-than-thou liberal left. And despite being very much of its time, set just after the end of McCarthyism and smack bang in the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, it is still deeply relevant today. With the rhetorics of the likes of Donald Trump, it still has relevance, but I won't actually say particularly now because people have been noting that it rings true today for at least the last 30 years. And I say 30 years rather than 50 years because it disappeared for 25 years because Frank Sinatra bought the rights to it and didn't re-release it till 1988. And
one of the many reasons to dislike that prick.
The belief was for a long time that because it got so caught up in the public consciousness and this idea that this brainwashing was possible, that it had something to do, or this sort of ability had something to do with Lee Harvey Oswald assassinating JFK. And so Sinatra being quite left-wing, etc., people thought that that was why he had it removed from print for so many years. And it turns out, no, it was just because he was in a dispute over money with United Artists. But that digression aside, let me get back to telling you a bit more about the film. I'd have a few grumbles with it, but they're really minor and are magnified simply due to familiarity with the film, I think. For example, while the sinister forces of communism wait 2 whole years before doing anything with Sergeant Shaw, the 2 romances of the film are bizarrely accelerated. Janet Leigh's Eugenie goes from meeting the stranger Bennett Marco on the train to ending things with her fiancé to moving in with Marco in literally the space of one afternoon.
One of the many reasons to dislike Frank Sinatra.
While Raymond goes from reuniting with his shabbily treated and cruelly dispatched old flame to becoming a newlywed with her in an evening.
I'm blaming Sinatra for that too.
And for the negatives, that's it, more or less. Or, except maybe old Blue Eyes himself. No great actor Sinatra, and no great favourite of Scott's, clearly. But this film is far and away his best performance.
Yeah.
To damn it with faint praise, I guess. Alas, though, that Sinatra really isn't a dramatic natural. For example, the scene where Raymond tells Marco about the content of their fellow squad's mate's dream, sees Sinatra walk calmly across to Lawrence Harvey, before then roughly grabbing Harvey's arm and asking him wild-eyed how he knows that. It's painfully stilted.
Yeah, that poor monologue at the end. Whatever did it do to deserve having Frank Sinatra perpetrated upon it? Oh,
yes, it's the real Achilles heel of the film. It is Sinatra, and it's got to be stunt casting in a way because the early 1960s, Sinatra's at his peak.
Yeah,
the Rat Pack and things. So maybe that's just simply to get more people to come see it. It's a pity though because the rest of it is so good. Lawrence Harvey is really interesting.
Yeah,
his manner in this film is cold, awkward, perhaps a little wooden.
I would say he's probably the kindest, warmest, bravest man I've ever met. So don't know where you're getting that from. I blame Sinatra.
That could be easily mistaken for bad acting. But while I'm not familiar with Harvey's other roles, I really think not. To me, it's a representation of Shaw's insular nature, his uncomfortableness with the world, his inability to fit into the world he neither understands nor belongs in. Now, I would say that interpretation is given credence by the way he transforms and absolutely lights up when he is with, or even talks about Jocelyn, his love interest. And viewed like that, it is in fact a fine performance, well gauged, and also makes Shaw a rather pitiable character rather than the ogre you might think him to be. And keeping on with casting, while I don't know how it seemed then, for people of our generation, one of the strangest things is seeing Angela Lansbury, you know, Mrs. Potts and Beauty and the Beast, sweet mystery-solving Cabot Cove writer and amateur sleuth Jessica Fletcher as the big bad.
Sorry.
I'm just picturing a typewriter in my mind now and seeing the keys going down as that music plays. As Raymond's scheming, evil, amoral mother, she is so far removed from any other role I was accustomed to seeing her in that it was a real shocker the first time I saw this.
Yeah.
But she's great because she is evil. So evil, you would say that she's evil, like the fruits of the devil. Evil. James Gregory as Senator Iceland is also great. His bumbling performance in committee, his inability to remember the exact number of communists he has absolute proof of the existence of in the Department of Defence, his role as a henpecked husband, and the fact he gets to deliver the best joke in the entire film when he looks at a bottle of Heinz ketchup and then tells the world that the absolutely definitive number of communists he has proof of is 57. Though perhaps this isn't a casting issue, it's more this is about how the film goes. But though perhaps the one thing that I would change is that I wouldn't have had Iceland in the conspiracy. He seems too stupid to pull it off. For me, better that he just remained the patsy and evil Jessica Fletcher, the power behind the throne. But all I will say is, do yourself a favour if you haven't seen this. Why don't you pass the time by playing a little solitaire and watching The Manchurian Candidate? That's an order, soldier.
Heartily enjoy this film, and I don't think I'd seen it in a while, probably not since the perfectly competent but entirely unnecessary remake came out, and I think I'm pretty sure I watched it again round about then. But yeah, it's just such an enjoyable film to watch, and I certainly second that recommendation. Perhaps I'm doing a disservice to 60s, let's be honest, mainstream studio cinema, but seems unusually transgressive in a great many respects. I suppose, like I say, maybe enough time had passed where you could get away with just knocking McCarthyism and all that stuff, but you surely still must have been a little bit politically sensitive. And
apparently the writer himself too was massively surprised because it's based on a novel by Richard Condon.
Mm-hmm.
The Richard Condon? Yes. And when the film was released, he was genuinely surprised that so much of the satire was basically left untouched from the book, because you can do that sort of thing in a book easily, but a film with Frank Sinatra?
Yeah, so it's a film with some pretty transgressive politics. It's got two leads, both of which are very damaged, both Marco and, for the obvious reasons of his conditioning and his nightmares that he's having from it, he's pretty vulnerable in that respect. Mm-hmm. And Shaw himself is, I suppose, the other lead is also obviously damaged and was in a less charismatic place to come from the first instance. So there seems to be an awful lot of detail in there that I wouldn't have really expected to come from a mainstream studio outing at the time. And also points such as Frankenheimer's and whoever his cinematographer was, the scenes you mentioned where they're doing that kind of pans around the Women's Institute like meetings, then it turns into the Politburo and goes around, and you can see it coming from the various different people's perspective on it. That's a really cleverly done sequence. Mm-hmm. Really visually quite a good way of pulling you into that narrative, and it does such a really good job of that.
It works in a few ways there, because it's, first of all, it's kind of surreal, which fits in with it being about brainwashing and these people not really knowing what's happening to them, as well as visually explaining actually what's happening without having to say it so much. The audience, you can get that, as well as it being understanding that the kind of fractured minds of the soldiers and why they're having these nightmares too.
Yeah, a really clever scene, and there's a number of scenes through it. I have a few niggles that are almost not worth recounting. It is perhaps convenient that Shaw's trigger phase and visual cues so readily stumbled across in real life somehow. That's a little weak.
In the bar, the scene in the bar where he gets triggered by the radio, that's not so bad, but the fact that his girlfriend turns up wearing the Queen of Diamonds costume.
Little on the nose. Yes.
That's a little forced, I think. But the radio, I'll let slide. There's got to be some way for Marco to get a clue, and the things that are said in the radio don't sound so awkward.
Yeah.
But yes, the Queen of Diamonds costume's a bit forced.
I think it's actually the barman saying it, if memory serves. But at any rate, it's same difference. And I almost don't want to mention it because I suppose we should. If you were making this film today, everyone would be crying about it having a whitewashing problem. This is probably more a geopolitical issue than it is diversity, given the era. I don't suppose there's so many, Chinese and Korean actors walking about, given the relative states of the politics at the time. But while I'll almost buy KD as sort of generic Asian, even though he's, Sudanese and Egyptian and English or something, I have rather less sympathy for the world's most Italian-looking Korean, Henry Silva.
Yes.
I mean,
you know how Dr. No is supposed to be Asian? He looks about as Asian as Dr. No does.
yeah, I mean, we should really just be happy Mickey Rooney's not hanging around with a set of false teeth. But yeah, minor niggles again, and Angela Lansbury, oh my gosh, what a role. And
she's fantastic in it.
Not only is she fantastic, but she's not just generically evil for evil's sake. She has her own agendas and some fairly complex motivations. I mean, certainly by the end of it, you almost feel sorry for what she's had to do, which is another nice bit of writing when you can get away with something like that. Yeah, just a really well written and well realised performance from all of the main characters, the protagonists and antagonists in the film, and that just all adds up to making it really, really great.
Mm-hmm.
I will not hear a bad word said about it apart from Frank Sinatra. Which is two words, really, I suppose.
Yes, I suppose it is.
So yeah, two very different takes on brainwashing there. I think the only way you can really compare and contrast them is they have the same overarching theme. They're two very different takes on what you can expect from something with so general a concept taken to very different extremes. However, I would certainly recommend both of them to you, and if you have somehow made it to this point in your cinematic career without seeing The Manchurian Candidate, then you definitely need to get that sorted out.
Yes, and make sure that it's the 1962 one, not the 2004 one with Meryl Streep.
Yes.
Which, despite being a Meryl Streep film, isn't entirely awful. And I remember it being quite entertaining, and Liev Schreiber in the lead role is pretty good. But it's another one of those utterly pointless remakes.
Yeah. It's
so similar to the original, but slightly less good in every way. And the original exists. Just watch the original.
Yes.
Even if it does have Frank Sinatra.
I forget who said it originally, but why don't you start remaking bad films, not the good ones? Do the bad ones better. So we will be back with you in a mere 10 days with another general catch-up of what's been kicking around recently. We'd like to take a moment, as usual, just to thank everyone who's been sharing our links on the Twitters or the Facebooks. You can hit us up on either of those at twitter.com/fudsonfilm or facebook.com/fudsonfilm. Email us if you like, podcast@fudsonfilm as well. I think particular mentions must go to the folks at the Magic Lantern, with their excellent podcast, and Lantern Cast, who always happy to see them digging what we do, and of course the folks at, in particular at Blake's Wright on Twitter, who does the very entertaining I'm the Host podcast, which is very much worth checking out if you haven't done so as well, who we're glad to have amused somewhat with our digressions into talking about intraocular heroin injection. Someone had to appreciate it, and even if this is just you, Blake, I'm happy that we've reached out and touched someone.
Look, we have caused the feelings of contraction in pregnant women because they were laughing so much at our discussion of intraocular heroin injections. So it's powerful, powerful stuff. You should seek that episode out.
We're going to have to come with a government health warning soon, I think. So, as I say, we'll be back with you on the 20th of this month, so close to the end of the year, so close. And until then, take care of yourself and each other. Goodbye.
Very well.